Recording, Mary Jo. Sorry, I was helping Tim.
Oh, sorry. You can't be in two places at once, can you? I guess you can. Thank you.
I don't know why you do it different.
So I'll call the meeting to order at 10:03, and I'm starting to say,
You
Eric
are.
know that he has a work commitment this morning. If things change, he'll join. Hi, Jesse.
Hello.
We just lost Tim.
He's coming back.
There you are.
Okay. Are you hearing us talk right now? Sorry.
We can hear you and we can see you.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, looks like we're all present and accounted for. That's great. So we haven't met for a couple weeks, so the first thing on the agenda is the meaty part of our agenda, which is to get an update on where we are with design and plans with BSC. I know that Kurt has some updates for us, both for Hartford Avenue and 156. I sent everybody, hopefully you got the agenda, a note that I got last night from a resident at 31 Hartford Avenue, voicing his disfavorable opinion of the project, but it doesn't address really specifically the issues on his property that need to be resolved. So I'm putting that under our welcome statement so that we address it when we start the discussion on Hartford Avenue. And also, in case I forget, when we get down to schedule and next meetings, I would like some feedback on whether people want to update the Planning Commission on the project at some point. We don't have to, we're not required. But Kim Gross invited us if we'd like to. So I think with that intro, unless anybody else has a welcome statement, I'll pass it off to BSC. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
I apologize for not making the last meeting. It just business kind of like closed in on me that day, and I totally.
You're taking minutes, right, Frank?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, and folks, I'm going to have to step out at 11. So if I make an unceremonious exit, that's what it's about.
Thanks, Jim. We'll try and move this along today. Thanks. Okay, Kurt, you're up.
Okay, and I will try to move it along. So if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick, as we've done in the past. I'm going to open up our project schedule to just quickly look at, to get a check-in as to where we are. So let's see. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So today is June 2nd. We are in final design. We're actually doing pretty well on Harford Avenue. Shore Road, as we had talked about last time, is lagging a little bit, but the good news is I did hear back from Connecticut DOT, District 2. Rick Chapman is the person I'm dealing with down there, and he was giving me response to the initial plan that we had sent him for Shore Road. He said it looked good to him, and that the recommended next step, which makes sense, is to finalize the final design for Shore Road and then get that to him for review. The good news about Shore Road is that the level of detail in the preliminary design versus the final design is quite honestly not a lot different. Although we call it preliminary and final, because most of the stuff out there is going to utilize standard DOT details, et cetera, we have to because it's their road. The preliminary design that we prepare is really more like an initial final design. So although we feel like we're slightly behind schedule for Shore Road because of the delay in engaging DOT, we think we're going to very quickly be able to make that up once we get that preliminary design submitted to them. My concern still remains their availability, however, for getting responses back. As an example, I did reach out to him over a week ago with some questions, and I still have not heard back. We're still forging ahead, and we're going to just put placeholders in for the things that we're not sure about in order to keep things moving. But there's an example of where, unfortunately, we can reach out to them, but there is sometimes some idle time when we're waiting for them to get back to us. So we're still okay as far as schedule. We just got to make sure and hope that once we do submit those detailed materials, that we can get some meaningful feedback in a pretty short amount of time. So I will, let's see, stop sharing. Okay. So as we've done in the past, we'll divide the discussion up between Hartford Avenue and Shore Road. We'll start with Hartford Avenue. Just to recap our discussion last time, pretty much the layout of the sidewalk on Hartford Avenue has been finalized as far as its location, width, etc. And really the items that we were looking at were more the details relative to how does the sidewalk interact with the properties that abut the back of the right-of-way, in particular, a grouping of properties as we approach Bocce Lane that are topographically lower. They're a localized low point, if you will, that created some grading challenges. And really that's what we'll focus on today. At the last meeting, we had talked about putting some plans together to be able to present to the building official and then ultimately be able to engage the homeowner. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. We've got those done in draft format. I'm going to ask Jesse to chime in, but I'll kind of start with the overview. And please bear with us because we have a full plan set at this point. I don't think we will necessarily go through the entire plan set. That may get a little bit painful with the screen sharing. But we now do have a complete plan set, which includes both the layouts that we're going to focus on, but it also includes all the details. For example, the detailed cross-section of how the sidewalk is built, exactly what the curb is. Unless the committee wants to see that, I don't think we necessarily need to go through that in this meeting, but those materials are kind of ready to go. I also want to add, and this applies really to Hartford Avenue and Shore Road, we've been paralleling some things. So for example, Jesse has been working on the design details that we're going to go over. I've been working on technical specifications and bid documents. So those materials are also ready. And we want to do that just so we have everything ready to go. There's no reason that we have to have one follow the other. So we can save a lot of time by working on those things concurrently. So that way we could get ready to go and get this thing out to bid as soon as we get the design issues, resolved. The other thing I'm thinking is, and we don't have to go there now, but depending on what happens with DOT, we want to give ourselves the flexibility to not have the Shore Road piece hold up anything, just in case something happens where worst case scenario, somehow DOT says we're putting everything on hold and we're not even, I don't know. We want to be ready to go and not have that affect the whole project. So by paralleling these things and have everything ready, gives us the flexibility to kind of respond and adapt as things are kind of coming at us relative to DOT. So what I think I'll do is I'm going to share the screen quickly and then turn it over to Jesse to get into some of the details. So the first thing that I'm going to share is the site plan for Harford Avenue. And this is something that you've seen at the last meeting, but that in this case is a little more detailed. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
And sorry about the scaling. I will zoom in. And sorry about the slow refresh rate too. But just a quick recap. So here we are starting at Shore Road. We have our gateway area, and last time we talked about how very little of the property of 277 Shore Road LLC that we're affecting, which was good news. Most of it's in the DOT right of way and the town right of way. We had just talked about the small piece there. Working our way down, maintaining the driveways at his property. You can see we've got the brick banding in, and we can talk about specifically what that looks like. Jesse's going to show you some images that are good design examples, and that's a classic example of a final design detail. You can see that Jesse has started to include the new mailbox locations. I will be in Oline today down on Harford Avenue to verify a few things relative to mailbox locations and whatnot, just to make sure that we're getting that dialed in. And to recap from last time, we talked about the fact that we're going to go with, I'll call them basic black mailboxes on a steel post. Every property will have a 4-inch sleeve installed. Not every property will have a mailbox. If there's a mailbox there, we will plan on replacing that mailbox. I'm going to say in kind, meaning in its relatively in its present location. That's one of the things I'm going to look at today. We can use this as an opportunity to tweak the locations of some of those mailboxes if we need to. And that's important because, again, once we put the sleeves in, they're in concrete. To put a new sleeve in would be a big deal. And if you recall, we had talked about, I think, I can't remember. Somebody asked a question about what at the top of the sleeve. I think it was Jim. The top of the sleeve, and essentially what we do is we fill it with sand, and at the very top there's a very thin cap of a pourable grout material that can easily be removed if somebody later on wanted to put in a mailbox. So it's not like there's a PVC cap sticking above the sidewalk or anything. Most of these things generally go unnoticed by the general public. So kind of scrolling down the sheet, you can see that Jesse's put in the driveway cuts, and we had talked about the driveway cuts last time, pretty much duplicating what's there, but creating more of a uniform, cleaner looking appearance. So we've got some uniformity as far as the radius of these curb lines. I think it'll look very nice. You can also see, and I'm going to defer to Jesse to get into detail, but you can see where he has laid in the driveways here on some of these low-lying properties that we talked about last time, and he'll get into a little more detail as to what that means and some of the questions that we have for the committee on that. So then approaching down at the bottom sheet a little more towards Bocce, you can see again some more of these sidewalks as we approach, moving down towards Bocce. And then once we get back to 37, the topography is a little friendlier to us. We had talked about that's kind of the one area on the project where the sidewalk, the private sidewalk, comes into the right of way. So you can see where we're cutting it off and just creating a direct connection out to the sidewalk. I think that'll look nice. We will remove the fence, obviously, that's in the right of way. I think we can do a nice job of kind of modifying what's there, and hopefully that will keep that property owner happy with what we have. That's an overview. What I think I'll do is defer to Jesse, and he's got a couple of things to show you. not only does he have the plan sheets, but we've got some of the graphics that we had talked about last time. And I love the idea of the graphics. He did a phenomenal job on them, and a picture speaks 1,000 words. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jesse. And Jesse, maybe we just start with some of the graphics, and that get the conversation flowing. What do you think?
He's on mute.
Jesse, you're on mute.
Yep.
There you
Yep.
go.
Thank you.
Oh, if excuse me for interrupting. If you have questions as we go along, we're going to lose Jim. Feel free to ask during the presentation so we can
Please
get.
jump in. Yeah, please jump in. We want it to definitely be at this point in the design. We want it to be really interactive as we're starting to really get into fine detail now.
Make sure I share the right screen here. All right. Can everybody see? We're at. This happens to be in front of 27 Hartford Avenue. So we've superimposed the new walkway, 5 foot wide, with and you can see the brick stamped concrete strip there. That is a question about what is that pattern and how is that oriented. Right now we have what's called a running bond running parallel to the curb line, but it could be anything. It could be herringbone, it could be stacked bond, it could be squares, it could be anything. So some feedback on that would be helpful.
And our recommendation is to emulate what we did south of Bocce, just for design consistency. That's just our suggestion, but like Jesse said, it could be anything.
What would you call what we did south of Bocce? So we have a name for this.
That was kind of a running bond. In fact, I'm trying to find a photo of it now. So Jesse, maybe go on, and in the meantime, I'll grab a photo of it.
Okay.
That I can call up.
This looks really nice, Jesse.
So in this rendering, again, we're at 27 Hartford Avenue. And this is one of those ones where I think we have some of the most challenges along the route. Not only is the property depressed, but we also have the chain link fence and associated gates at the driveways. So in this option, we're showing basically providing the steps to meet their existing walkway and gate. And then that's based on our elevation at the back of sidewalk, and then simply sloping back a sidewalk with soil and grass down to meet existing as fast as we can without impacting their fence. This is certainly the easiest and cheapest option. And it's really kind of a discussion with the homeowner if that's something they want to do, or if they want something different. We talked about the other option, which is again the stairs to meet their walkways, and possibly some sort of retaining planter space, and this would help limit the impact onto their property or other structures such as this fencing, or if they have something else, other types of fencing, plant material, that sort of thing. So this is kind of what we came up with as a kind of a retaining wall type situation, with planting to kind of fill that space.
Those planters, those would actually be on town right away.
That's correct. Yep.
So there could be some question as to who maintains them.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd be more inclined to go with the grass.
Right. Yeah.
This is certainly cheaper.
Right.
It's cheaper, and also maintenance wise, grass we can mow. If the homeowner doesn't mow it, we can easily mow it from the town perspective. Plantings are not whole of the story. I can't see Adedante's guys out there, weeding planters.
I'd also like to add in this image, as Jesse mentioned, the steps that we've included. It is my opinion that you're not obligated to put those in. Theoretically, it's your right of way. If you felt that it was simpler, both from a project cost standpoint and a long term, there really is no hard and fast obligation for you to put those connections in.
Kurt, would there be a question about a railing of any sort, a slip and fall on those things?
Great question. Connecticut code says that in a case like that, you don't have to have railings, and it has to do with the vertical drop. I think 30 inches. That's an example, however, of where if somebody said, well, even though it's on town property, you're really doing it for my benefit. I'd like a railing. We'd probably be in a position to say, I'm sorry, we're not putting a railing in. So then, not being, I'm not an attorney, but let's say we don't put a railing in, even though it's on town property. Is there some liability there because the town did put the steps in? And somebody may say, well, clearly you put those steps in because they directly connected that person's walk. They weren't just some random steps. And if that person trips and falls, probably a question for the town attorney, are you opening up yourself? And that's why I kind of go back to maybe the easiest thing to do is not do anything, just make it all grass.
The rise and the run of those stairs is pretty standard.
It would have to be, yeah. It would all be per Connecticut building code. Absolutely.
Kurt, sorry, Kurt, have we confirmed that the gates swing both in and out from the property? I'm concerned about interference from the pitch on the driveway.
Absolutely. So Jesse and I spent some time on the phone this morning. The driveways, that's a great segue, Jim. Whereas the grass slope, as you can see, pretty simple, the driveways are a concern. So Jesse, maybe
Transition
the
to the
perfect
other
segue.
plan.
Yeah. We feel that the grass slope, if the committee said, just make them all grass slopes, we're fine with that, right? It'll save you the most money. I don't want to say that's the easy part, but we just transition down, almost like the picture I showed you from Hebron. The driveways are the last item that's really giving us concern that we want to talk about, and we definitely want to have an open conversation about how to proceed, because there's a few things that the driveways affect, that it's sort of this cumulative effect where one thing affects another, which then affects another. And I don't know, Jesse, maybe is that photo a good one to, well, maybe go to one of the plan sheets, Jesse,
Yeah.
where you show it, and then we could always circle back to that example photo.
While we're doing that, I'd like to go back to the step issue.
Absolutely, sure.
If we may. I think that if we just slope it without any steps, I think we're more liable in a slip and fall case than if we provide the steps. If there's no mandate or no code requirement for a railing, then we simply don't put a railing on. We can't be held liable. But I think if we do not put any kind of opportunity there for somebody to easily navigate this from our sidewalk to their sidewalk, i.e. steps, we're more liable, I think, from a slip and fall standpoint. Grass, somebody gets on the grass, falls, and bingo, now we've got a problem. Just my opinion.
I hear you, Frank. I do think that perhaps this may be one issue we have to get some legal advice on.
In regards to those steps going down, is there any way to make them less drastic, such as stone, like larger stone across, 2 steps down on grass, but, or with landscape timbers on either side to make it almost like a plateau step down, looking more natural rather than that hard concrete. That may be an alternative to offer. And I don't think you would have the same hard surface that you could fall on or fall off of. Because now you may be able to slope grass away from those steps. And, you know, I know in a lot of cases it would be slate. I don't want to get into buying any slate, but there must be other materials that can be used for a flat rock step down.
Yeah, I definitely think there's things that could be done, and Jesse, chime in, please. But we could actually make them out of concrete, but they could be colored concrete, for example. So they could color the concrete gray to simulate stone. They could have a stamped surface that is not a pattern stamp, but simply a textured type of stamp. It's amazing what you do with concrete, and then you have the ability, it saves you money relative to, say, bringing in granite slabs. It also gives you a little bit more flexibility to adapt to the site-specific situation, because you can set your form work and make minor adjustments to make sure that everything lines up, verify the code compliance as far as the riser heights and all that, then pour the concrete, versus buying, let's say, slabs of stone that once you deliver them, that's it, you can't change them. But absolutely could use concrete to give them a little more of a natural look with a textured finish. That's absolutely possible.
I think what Bonnie might have been saying was, you know, maybe landscape timbers or something of that nature, just to soften it up. I mean, concrete, you can do a lot of things to concrete, but it's still concrete. I mean, when you start dealing with some more natural materials, it really does soften it up. And I agree with you, Bonnie. It's kind of a sterile look with, you know, too much concrete. So I think softening it with some natural products would be a lot more palatable. At least it would be for me if it was my front yard.
Yeah, the landscape, you could make the steps out of landscape timbers. The problem that we do run into, I'm not saying it's not doable, is maintenance, durability, and potentially some code compliance issues. For example, the steps would have to be solid, so they'd be pretty big timbers to make sure that we had a continuous step. But it could be done. It certainly could be done.
I think what you're saying about the concrete, Kurt, is that you can shape something that looks more like a rock rather
Absolutely.
than concrete.
Yep.
And that, I think, would I think that would be softer, where, you know, the grass comes a little bit closer to it rather than that solid concrete block. I mean, I think that looks nice. I think the people may like that, but I also think in regards to falling off either side and liability and all of that, a step down with, you know, a flat surface, it's made out of concrete or some flat rock, you know, something to soften it though.
Yeah, we can pull some images together. In fact, as Jesse's talking, I'll pull up some images, just to kind of get, again, I love pictures, right?
How many properties are we talking about here? There's only maybe 3 properties that may have that particular feature.
There's actually more than that.
That's what I thought.
29, 27, 23, 21, like 19. Because again, it's wherever they have an existing walkway that comes to the right of way and then ends, we're meeting it. In most cases, again, the stair tread is going to be consistent in riser height, respective of its own, you know, series of stairs, but it may vary across properties. You know, one might be 6.5, one might be 7, one might be 6 inches, depending on what the difference we have to make up and how much of a slope we want from their walkway to the bottom of our step. You know, like on 9, you can see there's one step to make up that difference, and then 7 doesn't have one. 5 doesn't even have a walkway. So
Well, I don't
quite
think
a
that we
few.
have to be consistent with each one, either concrete or steps, do we? We can take each property and see what, because some properties, I believe, there's one that has concrete walkway already. Trying to put in a rock step is not going to satisfy them. I think you have to make their concrete look as good as possible, because we're taking some of their sidewalk. But others that just have a grass slope, I think it, you know, the softer we can make it, the better.
Well, and there's a
Others,
couple here at 31 and 29. You know, they have a stone or paver walkway. You know, would we match a concrete walkway to their nicer decorative walk?
Well, I think that if we could, and it's not a massive difference in cost, then why wouldn't we?
right.
And I think what we talked about before too is, okay, now we're going to encroach on their property to meet their existing walk as like here in 29. You know, does that trigger us doing anything in particular to their existing walk?
Do you have a graphic of that property of what you have
29?
filed that? Yeah.
No. What we have at 27 is kind of similar across the board.
Okay.
In terms of the step.
You saying there walked us to meet the property line?
What was that?
Are you saying that the homeowner walk does not go out to the property line, and therefore there'd be a gap between our walk and their walk?
That's correct. So like in 29, you know, their walkway ends short of the right of way. So we're showing connecting it now. I guess that's a good question is, do we just take our concrete walkway / step configuration and end it at the right of way, and it's up to the homeowner to meet if they desire to meet their walkway to ours. And then that way we might get away from, you know, there's areas where we're going to have to touch them where they, you know, at 31 where there's generally meets the right of way. But in case of 29, we're not going on their property to meet their walkway that may not be certainly code compliant or anything like that we don't want to get into.
Well, I think it's kind of heavy-handed. It was said we're going to bring it up to the line, and you know, it's up to you, homeowner, to make up that, you know, 2.5 foot distance. I think if we can match up to their walkway, I mean, once again, I don't think we're talking about a lot of properties here with that kind of matching issue. If we can match up to their walkway with size and style and aesthetics, you know, I really think it would be a good thing on our part to do. I'm not sure how much it's going to cost, but we should look at the cost potential there.
Again, I think in a case like that, where they have chosen to have the walkway go out just a certain distance, if we have, say, 2 step downs from the concrete that are more natural looking, a larger flat stone that's placed in, you know, building up 2 steps out of earth and putting larger stones in it so that it's a soft step down, I don't think you have to now meet their walkway, because all you're doing is 2 flat surfaces, not a poured step with a walkway away from it. If we did the poured step, I agree with you. I don't think that we should split hairs over 2 feet or 2.5 feet. I think that would be, that would just cause problems for us. And it would just look terrible. But that's why I'm hoping we can come up with something that's just a soft step down. I don't think we're talking any more than 2 steps down from any location, are we?
No, nope.
That's a good point, Bonnie. I agree. I agree with that. If we're doing poured concrete, we should match up. But if we could do something much softer to get to the property line and then let the homeowner decide how they want to make that transition themselves, I agree. I think that's a good point.
Well, one thing that you have to keep in mind, if you make the steps independent of each other, then settling and frost and stuff that are going to start heaving. I've seen this in a number of situations where, you know, you have like big flagstones or something, and over time they will not be uniform anymore, and then we'll have to go back and redo it. So the concrete, the unified step, if it were colored properly and so forth. And I know when we did sidewalks at the bottom of Harford Avenue, we said if you want us to go beyond the limit of the sidewalk and do some sidewalk work up to your business, like machetos and so forth, they had the option of having us do that. You know, we could say we're going to do a concrete thing. If you want us to match to your thing in your yard, it's another yard of material, no big deal. But if we start having to match material for material, then that gets into a lot of extra work. So I think though it ought to be a unified step system. Otherwise, if you have separate panels that will possibly move, that would be an issue.
I do have some example photos. If you want me to share the screen, we could take a look. Okay, so let's see. I've got
Jesse, are there options for a natural looking step issue that would accommodate Tim's concerns?
Yeah, I'm almost thinking it could be, and depending on what Kurt's showing here, this happens to be a precast concrete. You could just do a granite block. It's natural. It's relatively inexpensive because it's just a square block with a finished edge, kind of like this, to just be natural stone, and then we could set it on concrete, which would help with the settling issue long term. And that way the town isn't responsible for putting in a stair that 10 years from now, starts settling and becomes a tripping hazard in itself. And then
I found this one not necessarily that we would, these are a little formal looking, but this is an example of where you can stamp the concrete, as I mentioned, without a pattern. You're just stamping it to make it look like a piece of stone. What caught my eye on this one was the rounded cobbles, to your point, Bonnie, of softening things with natural, I just thought that was kind of an interesting approach there with some of the cobbles, right? It sort of does blend with the shoreline type environment. You could envision putting some decorative grasses amongst those cobbles or something, and very cheaply and easily kind of spruce it up. So that's why I, included that one. Another example of this one is that, and Jesse could probably give you a tremendous more detail than I can, but you can have many, many, many different colors, right? So you could have one property owner that says, I love tan, another property owner, I love dark gray, and just by the dye that they use, make it look like a totally different stone.
Well, I think it's a nice idea to give some individuality to it. Give the homeowner a little bit of option there, and I think that's a great idea, Kurt. I love the idea of those cobbles, and I also like the idea of the granite too. Maybe incorporating both of them. That's pretty interesting concept too.
So here's another one where it's concrete, but it's made to look a little more natural, than the one, for example, that we just looked at. This one is has a little bit of a Flintstone feel, if you will. And you can see along the edges, they just kind of got some mulch or something. But you could imagine the cobbles in the previous photo kind of bordering this thing. You can see the edges of this are a little undulating. We'd have to be careful of code issues, but again, it looks very natural. They've even got the simulated splits in there and the color variations. And this is all done on site with stains and powders and these guys, it's almost like how Disney World does it, right? With all their simulated rock. Good landscapers can really make this stuff look natural. And I think there's one more. Oh yeah. Whoops. Oh, here we go. This was something that I just happened to, but you could even do something that looks like a series of stones. This happens to be like a homeowner special, but just another example of they infill between the stones with a grout material or a polymeric sand, and now you've got steps that almost look like they're put together. So many options. And to Frank's point, maybe it's a combination of different looking steps. And I guess that plays into one of the questions we have that kind of goes back to the driveways of engaging the homeowners with some sort of a defined or compartmentalized approach to make sure that we're not approaching each homeowner saying, whatever you want, that we're saying, here's a range of options, pick from the menu or something.
Just style. Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
that makes sense.
Kurt, I'd recommend against those cobbles because you're going to get weeds growing out of those things, and it's going to be a nightmare to keep it shaped up. Where like your first example of those nice cement blocks, that looked pretty good, and it's easy to mow, and it's not just sheer concrete. It's got some character to it.
Looks snap.
Yeah, I think we got to keep it simple.
Yeah. So what we could do, I could envision we almost have, it's kind of like what we were talking about last time with the walls. We could go as we engage the homeowners and say, look, we have, I'll throw out a number, 3 different options to choose from. And you can pick one of the 3. And that's what the project will put in.
Mhm.
It's very compartmentalized. They may look different, but we know as the design team and the committee that they're all generally similar. The same contractor builds them. It's just slightly different details in the drawing set. And that way we sort of channel the design selection that the homeowner makes, and we can budget it accordingly. It's not an open-ended kind of thing. It's durable. It looks good. They feel like they've had a say in what they get. I think that's probably the easiest way to approach it.
I think we agree on that.
Okay. Then what we'll do is we'll work up literally what that is, anticipating that at some point over the next probably few weeks, we need to really think about physically engaging these property owners to start getting some of this feedback.
Do we need to talk to the building official before we do that?
We will. We'll wrap these materials up, and if it's okay with the committee, I'd like to have that discussion next week if we can, or heck, if he's available even toward the end of this week, just to show him some of these images. And the real purpose of that was to see what level of involvement, if any, he wanted to have, just to make sure if he does want to have a level of involvement, that we're responding appropriately, giving him whatever he may need or want. We just don't know that now. So we just want to make sure that we're crossing T's, dotting the I's relative to his department.
Well, he's waiting for us.
Okay. Then after this meeting, we will package up these images and the drawings as we talked about last time and get them to you, Mary Jo. But I think, and that way you can say, hey, here's the materials from BSC. When can you chat with them, and they'll go through these materials with you and get the feedback. One of the reasons, and maybe we can circle back, this was a great discussion about the steps. Maybe we can circle back to the driveways, which is the piece that's giving us a little bit of heartburn. Jesse, maybe go back to, well, maybe use your plan view and then jump over to that image, and we can talk about the driveways.
Is Jesse on mute?
Jesse, are you on mute?
Yes, he is.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think we'll we'll stay here at 27. And again, because this one offers probably the more challenging areas, given that they have gates that physically go across their driveways. So right now, the approach that we've taken is that we have our elevation at the back of sidewalk. And in pretty much all cases, we have a delta there that we have to make up from our proposed grade to existing. The current town regulations call for no more than 5% slope within the right-of-way for driveways. So we've taken that from our back of sidewalk and extended that as far as we need to hit existing grades. And in this case at 27, they have two driveways, and the one on the right is 8 feet beyond the property line, and the other one, the dimension's off, but that's probably like 7 feet from the right of way into the property line. The other thing that is challenging here, aside from the gates and the is does the gate open in or out? And Kurt can probably look at that tomorrow when he's down there.
Today.
Or today, yeah. They have a series of walkways on their property that come out to their driveway, and in particular, the one on the right, is going to intersect our new driveway slope before we can get to the existing grade. So there's going to be a grade difference there.
Jesse, transition to that graphical image, because that now that you've all seen this plan view, look at the concrete walk where it's labeled. And now as Jesse shows you this image, okay, so there's the concrete walk. You see the driveway in the foreground. The issue is in this image, you can see the end of our new driveway section at the fence. In reality, as you saw on the plan, that new end of the driveway occurs much farther into the property. So we end up with this, as I said before, you change one thing, which affects another, which affects another. So now we have the slope that is essentially off the edge of the photo, which means now their flat sidewalk is intersecting a sloped driveway. Okay, so that means, and the walkway is now at a lower elevation than the new piece of driveway. So that means we have to raise that sidewalk, which as we trace it back to those steps, do we put a step in the sidewalk itself? We're on a homeowner's property. They may say, I don't want a step. I want my sidewalk like it was. So now are we in a situation where we are, and that Jesse, that just disappeared off the screen, by the way.
Oh.
Where are we in a situation now where we're rebuilding that entire sidewalk back to those steps that you see? And then even in the vicinity of where Jesse's arrow is. Now that we've elevated the sidewalk, you can see that lower step to the landing.
Mhm.
And that's actually, if you notice, the riser height between the lower step and the landing is very small. That's not code compliant because it's non-uniform, but would we essentially be replacing that sidewalk? So now that lower step is actually becomes the landing. And then the same thing would happen in the background of the photo where you see the other concrete sidewalk circling around. There would be another ramp back there that extends into past the fence onto their property. So this is why the driveways are giving us some heartburn.
Well, to go back to the steps, why couldn't you just raise their sidewalk to meet the driveway about halfway across the lawn there instead of going way the heck back to the stairway?
And slope it. What's the difference in slope we're talking about? How many inches do we have to make up here, Jesse, between the slope of where the slope of the driveway meets the actual sidewalk? An inch or two or 10 inches?
Yeah, that's how I was trying to pull up the drawing because I have in non-print what the difference in elevation was.
I mean, we may just be able to change one or two panels in their sidewalk with the proper pitch and make up the difference.
Can I ask a question about our sidewalk? And didn't we talk about for driveways having the sidewalk slope down and then back up? And that is happening in this?
Yes, basically,
We still have that rise from their driveway
unfortunately, yes, it's,
already existing?
yeah. So at each driveway, we have depressed the sidewalk in its entirety, as opposed to ramping up, going over, and then ramping down. We have essentially depressed the sidewalk. The town regulations call for, what was it, Jesse, a 1-inch lip?
1.5.
1.5-inch lip at the road, so we have to deal with that. And that makes sense because that's to keep water from flowing from the road into these driveways. And we know that there's one property where people are already concerned. So that makes sense. But yes, we have actually depressed the sidewalk to, in general terms, to the level of the roadway. So rather than going up and over the sidewalk, we've actually pushed the sidewalk down, and we're still dealing with this. And it's because the town regulations talk about a 5% slope on the driveway. And we also have to think of the practical issue of it too, is that let's say that we could do whatever slope we want. We don't want to have somebody with such a steep slope right off the back of the sidewalk that as they drive their car down it or up it, they drag the rear bumper or so that's always a concern. If somebody has a 4x4, Frank could drive his truck over it and then not worry. My Honda Accord, it could be a concern.
It's just that in this property, there are just so many issues. Are we going to be changing their fence? So that, because now the height of the driveway on the asphalt part is probably higher than the bottom of their fence.
Absolutely.
Are we requiring them to change the fence, or are we going to be changing the fence? Which seems like to me, it's getting to be that we're going to do all the work on their property.
That's why it's given us heartburn. Yeah, as we've been looking at it, we're thinking, where does this end?
Yeah, where does it end?
Every time we touch one thing, it affects another thing, which then affects another. It's like a Rubik's Cube.
There's a further issue, I think, with a high water table and seeing the way water generally pools around Soundview. If we're raising the driveway level on their property, raising part of the concrete walk to meet that driveway, now we're creating these swales in front of the house where the water, even though we're going to be taking a lot of the water and sloughing it off the sidewalk into the street. So we may be reducing the total amount of water that ends up on the property. There may be parts on that property where we're actually increasing the ponding due to the way we're going to be creating swales. If we, if we feather down the grass into their property, we raise their driveway, we raise the sidewalk, we're concentrating the area where this water is going to pool.
Between the two driveway slopes is what you're saying.
The two
I can
driveway
see that.
slopes and
Yeah.
the concrete walk, where we're raising the elevation, even slightly, but we're raising the elevation in their yard, and it doesn't take much around here to create this ponding effect.
Kurt, have we questioned these landowners whether they want to maintain the two ramps or whether they'd be willing to get rid of one?
We have not engaged the homeowners yet, and that could be certainly something that after this meeting now, begin to engage the homeowners after we talk to the building official about the things like the steps and whatnot, that we absolutely ask them, about the driveways. And at the last meeting, I think we had speculated that historically it appears that because of a lot of these homes are either rentals or people have a high intensity of use during the summer season, people want to try to get as many vehicles onto these properties as possible. But I absolutely think it couldn't hurt to ask. All they have to say is no, but maybe we get lucky and somebody says, in fact, I'd like to get rid of that driveway. That'd be music to our ears, believe me.
Well, we were going to find out what the distance is between the walk and the ramp at that particular intersection. Are there a couple inches or 5 inches or what?
Yeah, Jesse, what's the delta there between the sidewalk and the slope of the ramp?
So on this one here on the right is about 7 inches from
So we have to make
back of
7
sidewalk.
inches up.
Yeah. And that's already, going down these lines here represent the ramp that Kurt was talking about, bringing that walkway down 6 inches
So we're there,
to make that up.
we're there on-site concrete walk. We have a concrete walk there where it intersects with the slope of the driveway. Okay, it looks about halfway down, so that would be like a 3.5 inch delta between their particular concrete walk and where the slope of the driveway is.
Yeah, that's probably a good assumption. Yeah.
So not tremendous. That's good news.
3.5 inches to make up over 15 feet.
Yeah.
That that's, I don't know, so 1/4 inch a foot. Is that what the code is? 1/4 inch a foot ADA code?
Yeah, percentage 5%. We could absolutely make that up, but by sloping. And what we would be doing is sloping up to meet the driveway, and then we would have to. Yep. And we would have to warp it a little bit as we meet the driveway. In fact, my house has something similar. My driveway is kind of a slope. My front walkway is flat. And then where it meets the driveway, the walkway kind of does a little bend where it intersects. So it's flush.
So that's very doable. 3 inches, 3.5 inches. That's very doable without having to rip their concrete walk up all the way up to their front stoop and so on and so forth. Maybe a couple of panels, a few feet of concrete walk to match up with that driveway slope. That's doable. But the next problem that becomes the swing of the gate. That's the issue I see here as being the big concern.
Yep. And maybe, and I'll look at that today, but maybe it's the kind of thing where
we can always reverse that swing for him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think Jesse's reading my mind, but yeah, fantastic, right?
Yeah.
If it swings out, we change it to swing in. Even if we had to readjust where the gate sits on the post, maybe it has to be a little bit higher. As I think Bonnie mentioned that before.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hopefully a matter of just undoing some bolts and
Mm-hmm.
lifting it up and retightening the bolts.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the options you should give a homeowner such as this is the option to buy the entire walkway as redone. So in other words, we're willing to do the area that we need to do to connect, to make them able to reach the driveway so that it ties in. But the sidewalk there looks in pretty poor shape. I think we should say, if you want the whole sidewalk done, here's the extra that it would cost you. You can opt for that as a buy-in extra. Similar to what you did, Frank, at Soundview, Shoreline, yeah, the association there. Because
I think we did that with Vaquitos too and a few others. Yeah.
They didn't pay us though. They stiffed us.
Who?
The Shadows didn't never paid for that extra sidewalk we put in for them.
Well, I think we ought to go down and have some lemon ice on them.
Yeah. Like 5,000 lemon ice.
Oh, we came under budget on that project, just so you know, on construction.
No, this was the original. This is back a long time ago. We put in an extra width of sidewalk for them beyond the 4-foot sidewalk. And anyway,
That's a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah.
But Kurt,
Yeah.
I like the buy-in idea, but if they say no way,
Then I think our obligation will be kind of what Frank was saying. Okay, that's fine. Then what we are going to pay for is to slope the last section of your walkway to reconnect it with the new elevation of the driveway, and that's it. The ultimate worst case scenario is if somebody says, and I'm not sure how we would deal with this, if somebody says, I don't want you doing anything on my property.
yeah, well, like, yeah.
So if we do have a worst case like that, the photo we're looking at now appears like we're not doing anything on their property. And I'm assuming the slope of that driveway that's in the right of way is not code. Is that correct? We can't do it.
It's the town regulation,
Mhm.
5%. Well, and technically this is 5% in the right of way.
Mhm.
Jim, I see where you're going with it, and I tend to agree with you. Does the project in that unfortunate scenario say, okay, we're not going to go on your property. This is what you see in this photo is what you're going to get.
So to be clear, we can do what we see in this photo. We can make this work within town regs. What we're seeing
It'd be a
here.
waiver. It probably has to be a waiver from
Yeah.
whoever.
And yeah, because we're in the right of way, the town regulations say 5%, but maybe we just get a waiver, and I'm sure that has been done. And that way, at least the project can say, look, you didn't want us on your property. We met the obligation of providing a paved access, which was there before. We did our part.
So given, all right, the second question then, the first retaining wall option that we had, and this would probably require getting on their property a little bit, but how much more expensive is it? And forgetting about the landscaping, maybe there could be a different treatment on that if that's a concern. But if we do that retaining wall and we maintain the slope of that driveway right there, is there a footing drain option that we could stick right behind that retaining wall that would go under the sidewalk into the street that may address whatever remaining drainage issues they have and not have to do any work whatsoever on their property?
I think you could put some sort of a horizontal drain, and then you would basically tee it into the existing PVC drain line that's in the road. It would be more work because now you'd be digging down to get to that drain line. You'd probably have to do some more cutting and excavation in the road to be
Okay.
able to, because you're going to have to physically expose the drain pipe, which is probably about 4 feet plus or minus down. So you'd have to have probably a square saw cut to be able to actually get a person down there, because they would physically cut into the drain pipe with like a T fitting. Absolutely can be done. A little more expensive because of that. So now you're talking about sheeting and shoring because you've got a deeper excavation, and you're talking about cutting into the drain pipe. The other slight concern would be that typically when we intersect any kind of drainage pipe, rule of thumb is we always put in a manhole. However, in this case, we're talking about probably a 4-inch pipe. We could get away with just a clean out at the very least, and that clean out would either reside in the brick band. And what the clean out is clogs typically happen where pipes change direction, where there's intersections. So that's why we always want to put a clean out there. So we could put a clean out that with just a little metal access box in the brick banding. So if that thing ever did get plugged up, but it's definitely doable. It becomes just a cost item.
I would like to steer as far away from putting in any kind of drainage pipes as possible. I think the cost is going to be outrageous. And the other concern I have is I'm not sure, but those catch basins on the upper part of Harford Avenue, I'm not sure are interconnected. I believe they may just be dry well essentially catch basins, which would then create a backflow situation where you'd be taking all the water from the street and allowing it to go back into people's yard. So I mean, I could just see massive problems there. I just like to steer as clear away from of that as possible.
I would agree.
I was just, just want to see what the options were.
No,
One
it's a good
thing,
idea. Good question.
one thing that strikes me about the retaining wall option is it, in and of itself, it softens up the stairs. Even if we didn't do landscaping, if we just did, colored gravel and boulders or what have you, something that's a non-maintenance issue, it softens up that stair production, and it sort of alleviates for a little bit there even the perception of water coming down into their property, because that whole thing can be pitched out towards the street rather than it's sloping down into the yard. It would be even just that little portion there, which is only a couple feet, sloping down into the street. And even if it's not making a huge difference, it will make some difference in terms of water coming onto the property and perception wise as well.
Yeah, good point, Jim. When you think about it, if you look at this scenario, that's all full of soil material. That soil material has the ability to hold water.
Right.
And then if you add plants in there, kind of like when we do rain gardens, they take up the water. But even as you said, without the plants, it acts like a giant sponge. And once it gets saturated, the water will tend to absorb into the ground versus flow onto their property. So there's definitely some positive attributes to this scenario that we're looking at relative to the perception of, well, now you've sloped this property and the water is flowing onto my onto my property. The other thing to think about is, kind of to Bonnie's point earlier, those retaining walls in this case could be landscape timbers. They don't have to necessarily be stone or concrete, right? These are pretty small walls. So they could be the old fashioned 6x6 timbers with the big galvanized spikes that you see. Pretty inexpensive. I'm sure whoever gets this job will probably subcontract that kind of stuff. These guys show up, they cut the timbers on site, so they're custom fitting them right in, and then they basically fill it with soil. So
I think it makes the steps make more sense as well. You know, the steps started looking weird only when we took out that retaining wall, but we retained those concrete steps.
This frames the stairs.
Right. So then we can have the inexpensive, easily maintained, stable and uniform option of the concrete stairs, like you said, being framed by this retaining wall.
I love the idea of timbers. I mean, anything we do to soften this thing up, there's a lot of concrete here. Anything we do to soften this thing up, I think, and make it less sterile and less Disneyland-ish, I guess is what, you know, I mean, uniformity is great, but there's also got to be the opportunity for individuality.
Yeah. And you know, the timbers are good for 20 years, right? They're ground rated, pressure treated. And to me, a 20-year design span is that's appropriate, right? If I guess the other question I would have is if a homeowner asked, "Hey, look, I'd love to put some plants in this thing, even though it's town property," is that something?
Right.
Hey, have at it.
You asked my question.
See, I read your mind.
That could be something that the homeowner could just trick out on their own if they want, or that we could have a sort of uniform option that we could do. I'm leaning towards doing less on their property just because, as you were saying, we're starting to get into a nightmare.
Yeah, it's really kind of bothering us that we're starting to see this sort of this chain reaction effect here that we've been talking about.
So if we could do this slope that we see on the driveway, make that work according to town regulation, make that out of permeable pavers, and I would even, you know, say not just the sort of pavers that we see here where water can seep down through, but actually the ones that actually look more like rings, so that, you know, grass can grow up through them, and that would really prevent a lot of the water from sloping down to the sloughing off into the driveway. That it may be a cheaper option, a more uniform option. It would get us out of just messing up people's front yards, and maybe even the best drainage option, because we're not going to be creating swales where they didn't exist in someone's front yard.
Kurt, what do you expect the planter stuff would cost?
I would suspect that, like the planter that you're looking at here, both sides of these stairs, labor and materials, no plantings, filled up, is probably a budgetary number. I would say probably between $3,000 and $5,000. And again, that includes labor, right? The materials aren't that expensive, but we typically double the cost. The other nice thing here is we've got economy of scale, right? So one contractor will do all of them in the same way. So you'll definitely get some savings there because they'll know that they can, you know, so it's not a linear kind of cost progression. The more they do, the cheaper they get.
Well, right, yeah. So
we could, I'm sorry, Tim.
Probably the homeowner would have to say, I don't want the ramp in my yard for us to get a waiver. If they said, yeah, put the drive in, then we have to comply with code, likely.
Yeah, so that's where the project would need to make a decision. Do we approach the homeowners, ask them if they are willing to let us bring the driveway into their property, as Jesse showed? If a homeowner says no, then they get what's in the photo simulation, as Jim pointed out. If they say yes, and again, this is just an option. If they would say yes, we would build the driveway. The downside there is, let's say if this property, as a good example, says yes, then we are into fixing their sidewalk, et cetera, et cetera. The other option is kind of like what Jim was saying. There is no option given to the homeowners to extend onto their property. uniformly across the project, this is what we do.
If that's the town's decision, would the building people say, hey, wait a minute, you're not complying with your own rules? Would they have to get a no from the homeowner in order to waive?
They could. The other concern that I do have is this, if you look at this photo simulation, that's a pretty steep slope. Could the town face some backlash if people say, boy, you came through and you did this project, you put this ramp in, and now every time I pull into my driveway, I'm scraping my front bumper on the on my driveway. What'd you do to me here?
I don't think the town could, in good faith, put the short ramp in there without a no from the homeowner. You're violating your own rules.
But if the homeowner said no, then we could go for the waiver, right, Tim?
Well, probably, but I'm just saying, you got to plan for whatever contingency. So if they said, go ahead, put the ramp in according to code, then we have to do that. We might have to readjust the bottom rail on the fence. And maybe if you're talking, I don't know, there's a difference between, I heard 7 inches on the change between the ramp and the sidewalk and 3.5 inches. So I'm not sure which is what. But if we could do a minimal slope to meet the ramp, then we do that. If the homeowner says, hey, I'll pay for, you got the cement guy here, I'll pay for a new walk, then that would be on their nickel.
Yeah, I agree that the 5% as the town regulation, that is the rule. So it does become a slippery slope if suddenly the town elects to not abide by their own rule, potentially to the displeasure or detriment of a homeowner. That could set the town up for a challenge or a legal challenge or something. It's a tough one.
A situation similar to that did happen. It was on Route 1, and the apron that was installed was very steep, and the homeowner was not happy. So, it definitely needs to be discussed with the homeowner, because I agree with you. You can't just put a steep slope in and say, there you have it.
Yep.
I think it's important to know our options if they won't allow us to go on their property, but
that's the real crux, right? If they say, I don't want you touching my property, then are we at what you see in this photo here? And the town just says, hey, look, you wouldn't let us on your property. We filled in the space and we're done.
Seems fair.
Yeah, ask them. If they say yeah, then we adjust everything as we need to adjust. If they say no, then we make it look like this.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
And it wouldn't be as dramatic as this photo because we will be depressing the sidewalk, correct?
That is correct. That's the one thing that this photo kind of doesn't show. And as Jesse pointed out, those 2 squares, where those are if you look in this photo, the last square right at the end of the planter before the driveway, that square is the one where we make the transition down. Yep. That is actually a ramp section. Yeah, it's because we started working on these before we actually had this, so we sort of got ahead of ourselves. But yes, that's your ramp section down. So I think that makes a lot of sense that we approach the homeowner, we have the steps, so my recommendation would be that we create the list of homeowners, and we have our Excel spreadsheet that has all the properties, and we've been using it to keep the notes. So we can use that same spreadsheet. So it's all summarized. We, associated with that, show on each of the properties the limits of the driveway, kind of what we talked about here, the little section of walk that would get adjusted. And then we're able to get with these homeowners and physically show them, if you allow us onto your property, this is what is being proposed. At the same time, we show them the 3 options for the steps. It sounds like we are saying we'd like to go with the timber retaining wall. I'll call them the timber planters. Is that something?
If we're gonna show options, Kurt, we might as well give them the option for either their timber retaining wall or grass, sloped
Okay.
grass.
Okay. Yep.
So, give them the option for that too.
Okay.
Are you contemplating making the homeowner pay for the planters or not?
I think the project would have to pay for those because they're in the town right of way.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we kind of have to calculate all these extras because, if you have 6 properties that need treatment and you have sidewalks and ramps and stuff, we could be talking, $10,000 a property extra, and that's
correct.
400,000. So we're going to have a shorter sidewalk on 1156.
That is correct. Yep.
I suspect that if you give them the option between a planter, with timber planter, which is the least expensive option, and grass, you might get 1 or 2 that say, give me a planter, and the rest that say, give me the grass. So I think it'll wash out, Tim. I understand cost is a big issue. That's why I try to keep it as
Maybe you say, well, we'll split the cost of the planter with it if you want that option, Come up with different ways to skin a cat.
Yeah. Or we'll make the planter, you put the plantings in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the project could just say the planter is just going to be finished with mulch, and that's it.
Or we're gonna plant grass in the planter,
Yeah.
We're just gonna make
We
it
have
grass.
to remember that the planters are, we can ask homeowners to pay for them.
We lost you, but we
I'm
lost you.
sorry, I think that the planters are on town property. So I don't know how we can make the homeowners pay for the planters.
It's an option.
Unfortunately, folks, I have to go. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Kurt, how much space is between the back of the planter and the fence for, maintaining, cutting grass and stuff?
Yeah, that's a great, in this particular instance, because they have a fence there, makes it a little bit difficult. My recommendation would be that the planter abut the fence, because there's no way you'll get in there to cut grass or anything. So I think in this case, the planter would have to just literally abut the fence. Not an ideal
A little over
scenario.
4 feet.
What?
It's a little over 4 feet in this particular location.
Okay.
I think this is the only one where there's a fence like this. All the other ones
Yeah,
without
we have
the
the
fence.
white picket fence down further a little bit. But yeah, this is the worst one for sure.
The white picket fence, isn't that gonna get removed? That's already an encroachment.
Right.
I'm correct?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would recommend that the timbers essentially are touching the fence, right? That they're literally just right up against the fence.
Can we get a quote for cement or timber and timber?
Oh, absolutely. We can have this as a in the bid, we can have this as a bid alternative, where the base bid is timber, for example, and then there's an alternate for concrete. And in this case, Jesse, please chime in, but probably would make sense to go with a segmented concrete block as opposed to a cast in place, because it's such a small wall. It's just logistically easier, and the segmented blocks are a little more forgiving because they can be field adjusted. There's no form work, it's hand work. You don't need to get in there and put in a a footing or anything like that. Very good for what I consider sort of a residential scale wall.
Are those the interlocking blocks, the architectural interlocking blocks you're discussing?
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yep. Yep. Not to belittle it, but you know, the kind of ones you see at Home Depot, a commercial grade, different systems. Some of them have a little notch they grab. Some have a little fiberglass pin that holds them together. Some of them, the newer systems, actually glue together. And then there's a capstone that literally gets just glued to the top to finish it off nice. So then,
In this instance, Kurt, if then the homeowner decides year 2 to change the beds we gave them into something else, what happens in that response?
It's our beds.
the plantings, you mean?
Yeah, say they decide I don't like them. I'm going to put dirt in this year and set some shrubs.
You know what you could do, and here's just a thought. Jesse could pick a couple of very simple plants that relative to the project aren't that expensive. And maybe we just say, these are going to be just some basic plants that are going in here. And then if a homeowner says, yeah, I'm fine with that, or I want to add flowers sometime later, maybe it's one of those sort of wink, wink. Sure, you can plant some flowers in here if you want or something. And
we ask them to mow the grass now on town property, so there shouldn't be any problem with them putting some plants in.
I don't think there's no. I'm not saying there's any problem because they're going to do it, and I think I would too. But if it's not maintained or if the dirt runs on the sidewalk or
I think ultimately the town would be stuck with, if let's say a homeowner just completely abandoned it and it looked terrible, it's on town property. I think the town would have to go in and address it.
Okay.
But my hope is that people, I almost look at this in some ways as an enhancement. I think in this particular case, it certainly is. My hope would be that a homeowner says, wow, this is actually really nice. I'm excited about maintaining this and making this look really good because this has actually enhanced my property.
I think you're going to find it very unlikely that somebody's going to abandon it. I think that you're going to find that most of the people are going to like it and want to do something more to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
More to it.
So Jesse, do you feel that if we included as part of the base project just some very basic plantings, just to put something in there, that would be not a big cost item to the project in however many of these we could end up with?
Yeah, it's pretty small because this would just be small perennials. It's not a big area to begin with, so.
It could be plantings or it could be grass.
Yep.
Somebody says, I don't want plantings. I just want to put grass there. Let them, we could put grass there. They can mow it.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, because plantings you have to water like crazy for months, and if people neglect it, then it's our problem.
Yeah. So if there's somebody says I don't want to deal with the plantings, just make it grass. I'll mow it. Fine, great.
Yep. Even that would look nice. It's green. It infiltrates the water, so it kind of still meets the criteria we've been talking about. That would be fine too.
Well, I think in that regard, Jim is correct that it will help with our water concerns, which really is, a big deal for us here. So
yeah, and I think it's important as we engage the homeowners, which will kind of be the next thing we should talk about. We'll make sure that let's say a homeowner says, no, I just want the grass slope. It's important that we make sure they understand, okay, I don't want to come out and say it, that you could have water onto your property, but that, I guess that is a possibility that you do have this slope now coming down towards your property. So I think what we should do is develop, this was very, very helpful. This is exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. I think what we should do now is develop the materials that we would need to sit with each of these homeowners. Again, after we talk to the building official, but as we approach each homeowner and sit with them, we need to have the materials to say, okay, these are the options you have. Essentially, option number one, the global option. Would you allow us to do work on your property because of your driveway? And we will have the figure to show your new driveway section would extend to about this point, whatever. Like we talked about, the segment of the walkway. If that happened, we would need to replace this segment of your walkway, et cetera. So people go, oh, okay, yes, whatever. Then in that same conversation, at the front of your property, if they have a walkway and we're talking about the steps, here are I keep using 3, but we'll come up with probably no more than 3. Here are the 3 options you have for steps. You can pick your style and then your color. And then the last piece would be, you can either have just a slope of grass or a planter. And if you choose the planter, it can be landscape timbers or segmented concrete block. With the segmented concrete block, you can pick either, and maybe we'll keep it really simple, tan or gray. And that's it. And then that's kind of the menu. It becomes pretty easy if somebody says, I don't want you on my property. Okay, then all we need to ask of you is, what kind of steps do you want? And do you want a retaining wall or no retaining wall? The whole driveway thing and all that kind of becomes a non-issue. And then we inform them that we will then simply create a transition from the back of the sidewalk to the right of way. And that's what you will get. The one, I know we had talked about the grass last time, and this is something that Jesse and I will look at because it is a potential concern. If on some of these, we may end up, and we'll double check this now that we have the dimensions and the elevations. If somebody does not allow us to go on their property, this little transitional segment of their driveway from the back of sidewalk to the right of way line could be pretty steep. Jesse, I don't know if we have a feel for that right now. And if we don't, that's okay. We'll figure it out. We probably would not want that to be grass. Even the reinforced grass. I'd be very concerned that a vehicle might not even be able to grip. It becomes very slippery. I think in that case, we should just put in bituminous material. And that's, again, I'm basing that on the fact that it's steep enough that grass becomes, even the reinforced grass, a maintenance concern and a slippage concern.
What about packed gravel, Kurt, versus bituminous, which is going to sheet water back onto somebody's property?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern if somebody refuses to let us on their property. Great point, Frank. So the gravel, again, because these things are pretty steep, gravel will want to move downhill, especially with vehicles moving over it. They could end up just eroding that gravel out very quickly. We could look at putting in some sort of reinforced gravel, and they have these, we call it a cellular material. It's kind of a fabric type material that's almost like a honeycomb where the gravel goes down inside of it. Yeah. This is a brand called GeoWeb, which is one of them. We can certainly look at that. Jesse, why don't Jesse and I look at those elevations, and we'll kind of call this the no access scenario, right? If a homeowner says, I don't want you on my property at all, okay, how do we address that no access scenario with the driveways? We'll delve into those specific elevations, and I'll send Mary Jo an email, and then we could always we don't necessarily need a formal meeting to maybe make some of those finer decisions.
Kurt, maybe the first question would be, if you have two potential driveways, would you be willing to get rid of one because of the?
Yes.
That would save a lot.
Absolutely. I would love it if somebody got, because these driveways are now kind of the only remaining tricky issue. I think everything else has been addressed, and I'm really happy that we resolved, the steps and the planters versus slopes. That's all very manageable. The one tricky issue in this whole thing really has become the driveways and transitioning the slope. But we'll get there. We'll manage it.
Which properties are we talking about? I mean, do they have the house behind? Do they have renters for their property that requires them to have two driveways?
Just ask, they might surprise us.
Well, we can always do that, but I'm just wondering, there may be an obvious reason why they have two driveways.
Right. Yeah. I think, like, as an example, one of these properties, if I'm not mistaken, it's a single structure, but it's 2 units. Yeah. So they have a driveway on either side. But certainly could ask, and maybe somebody will surprise us and say, yes, I'd like to get rid of one. So I guess that kind of transitions into, we'll develop all those materials, and we'll get on that very quickly. How do we begin to set up these meetings, or how do we even, under an ideal scenario, the homeowner says, okay, I'll be at my house at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, and Kurt Procharena from BSC is going to meet me at my house, and he's going to show me these things, and I'm going to tell, okay, this, all right, thank you. We could do that. How do we physically almost set up these appointments, if you will, with these people to literally say, hello, here's what we're asking you, and here's your options, and how do we, and unfortunately with the folks, I think it was 31 that just sent a letter.
I think we set aside 2 days, 3 days, whatever it happens to be, for a couple hours each day. I mean, short of you running back and forth 15 times, Kurt, saying, okay, you can set up an appointment on Tuesday between 2 in the afternoon and 6 at night, or on Thursday between 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. Pick your time slot, and we'll be there. And if you can't make any of these, please at least that's one way of doing it.
Yep.
And I hate to ask you this of you, Kurt, but it's possible that maybe a Saturday morning might be even the better time, because people work during the week, and it's hard for them to get down there sometimes. So I mean,
totally fine with us. Absolutely. I would do a Sunday morning if somebody, we committed early on that we'll do whatever it takes to engage these homeowners. And we'll do it. If a homeowner said, hey, look, I can meet Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. We might
get the majority of them to meet on a Saturday morning, and
Yep.
It kind of covers all the bases.
That's right. I'd be happy to do that. So I guess how do we physically begin to engage the homeowners to literally open up that discussion?
Kirk, are you gonna make up a Chinese menu so that, we really have our scorecard to go to a homeowner?
Yes, and what that menu will include are these graphics and the plans, so each homeowner can very clearly see in plan view what we're talking about, and then they'll see the graphics that Jesse produced. We'll also have example images, for example, of a timber wall versus the gray segmented block or the tan segmented block. So we can literally, for every one of these items, say, this is what it will look like.
So are we gonna convene again maybe next week, just kind of review the laundry list to make sure that we're all in agreement with that laundry list that you're gonna be showing these people?
I think that's a great idea, Frank. We'll pull that together this week, and I think we could have stuff ready to show you at some point next week whenever the committee could get together. And that could be a quick, theoretically, that could be a 30-minute meeting if we needed it to be.
So I think we have phone numbers or emails for the five or six properties that are in question here, right, Mary Jo?
I've never been able to get hold of anybody from 19 or 21 unless you have it.
I don't know, but this weekend I'll try to track them down this weekend. And at that point in time, once we have phone numbers and emails, then make a personal phone call or send them out an email and say these are the time slots available. Please, select one and give us a call or shoot it back to us.
Yeah.
What we should do too is because
email, so we'll have to give them a phone call.
Apologies, but I have to leave.
Yeah, I've got 10
I'll
minutes.
catch up at the end.
Okay,
Wait,
Thank you.
Bonnie.
What?
I just asked for, since I have a quorum, if you leave, I don't, approval of the minutes before you leave.
So moved.
Second, anybody?
I have to abstain. I wasn't here.
Well, you could second it still.
I'll second it. Okay, I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Frank.
Bye, Bonnie.
Thank you. Sorry to have to leave. Bye-bye.
Oh,
So
my.
I think we should also, because we were contemplating the other properties with the steps, which are not necessarily in that small grouping, why don't we, and I'll have this to you tomorrow, we have our spreadsheet of the properties that we've been using. Jesse and I will circle together and we'll put notes in each adjacent to each of the properties, send that out to you, Mary Jo, just so it's clear in case there is a property that wasn't in that little low-lying area, but we're looking at extending their walkway as an example. We want to make a note of that just so for completeness and consistency, if you felt you needed to contact those people, they're on that chart. They're on that list.
Now, would the wall option be reserved for people with so many steps or more? I mean, we don't want to give a wall to somebody who only has one step, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Jesse, are there some areas where we're only transitioning, let's say, 6 inches?
You're muted, Jesse.
There is, the closer you get to Hartford Shore Road, you get less of a grade difference there. And the question would be if we're still providing a walkway to meet their, even if it's the right of way, a walkway that meets their walkway that's in front of their house, that slope is going to be pretty steep.
Well, maybe it would be helpful to number each property that needs off sidewalk attention, that would need one or more of the menu options, and that way we could sort of quantify the potential cost when we're analyzing this and say, okay, we have, I don't know if it's 5 or 6 properties or 10 properties, but we could then say, well, likely this one would need the grassy slope, but maybe no wall because it's not that much of a grade. Or this one we've got probably ramp issues going into the yard and so forth. You know, we can quantify who needs what, and then we have a global picture of what properties will need some extra work, and then we can start quantifying. I still wonder whether a planter might be such an amenity that we might say to a homeowner, we might suggest you pick the best option and get the planter, and we'll offer to you the planter at half cost. But it will absorb water or look nice and all that, you know, give them a little skin in the game maybe. But we could consider it once you start costing out some of this stuff. Because ultimately, if we can reduce our costs for these improvements behind the sidewalk, we'll have more money for the rest of the project.
Yeah. We can certainly use the spreadsheet that we have that has all the properties listed, and we will amend that spreadsheet to include the description of each property. And for example, whether they have the walkway, whether they have the steps, whether they have a slope that we feel warrants a retaining wall, or those kinds of things. So we'll summarize that. We'll have that to you tomorrow. That's something we already have the sheet set up. We've already begun to populate with that kind of stuff. We can pull that together very quick.
I'm going to have to leave in 5 minutes, so Mary Jo, I'm not sure what else we need.
I should have,
Critical.
we don't have a forum. The only other issue was approving Kurt's second invoice, which he's already sent to town hall. So I guess we won't have a vote on it since it's just you or I. But I guess we could just give Tim our consensus whether we want to pay the second invoice for $6,000 to finish off the preliminary design and leading us into final design. And I support that.
And so do I.
Thank you. That's the only other kind of hanging out there. The only thing is then next week, I really think we need to come to the meeting with some idea of a community outreach program.
But we still haven't discussed Shore Road yet either. And I tend to believe that's going to take more than 5 minutes. So
yeah, exactly.
so.
And the update on Shore Road is now that we've heard back from DOT, we are in earnest working on the preliminary design. They did agree to our layout and the concept. So what we are working on now is pulling together the next level of detail. So for example, refining exactly where it goes around utility poles, literally putting in the crosswalks across the streets, what type of DOT ramp is required at each transition point. And again, all these materials are kind of DOT standard parts and pieces that then kind of get pulled together, you know, to form the project. We could have something to show you for next week's meeting if that, you know, since we're running out of time here. And that'll just give us.
I think that would be great. I think the other thing we need to talk about at Shore Roads, which I think is going to take some time, is relocating or off what we're going to do with signage that typically now is on the right of way that has to get moved. And we discussed the cascading effect. If you're going to tell the property owner to move their own sign, are we going to pay them a stipend to move their own sign? What happens if the sign is not compliant? Now, if they move it, is it still going to be compliant? They have to go to rezoning, and there's a whole cascading of events there, and I think that's going to be an important discussion. Before I leave, I have a question, and that is going back. And I'm sorry I couldn't make last meeting, but I had suggested a more decorative mailbox post. And I sent it off to Mary Jo. I think I sent it off to everybody, but is there a reason why you chose the just plain vanilla post versus the more decorative post that matches the poles on the lower part of Harford Avenue? I was trying to find something that connected the upper part and lower part, and that post mailbox posts actually look very similar to the poles that we put in the lower part. So is there a reason why you chose that?
I think we were just trying to do cost items, be sensible costs, but what you sent us, and I did mention that at our last meeting about your request, seemed reasonable. So I think it's just a cost item. If we can get a little bit more decorative within our budget, that'd be great.
Well, actually, I looked at the cost that was provided by Kurt, and there was a cost for the post and a cost for the mailbox. And the item that I gave you was a cost for the post and mailbox complete, which was less than the two individual costs of the post and the mailbox, which I found interesting, but it was actually more economical than a plain vanilla post with a mailbox on it. So maybe
Did you find that those did not meet the DOT concerns you had, or federal mailbox concerns, or you didn't?
Frank, the post that you sent, I don't know if Mary Jo, can you forward that to me? Was it made of steel?
Yeah, it was right next. If you go to Home Depot, if you go on the Home Depot website, you got the post that you guys chose, which was a Home Depot post. Okay. And next to it was a decorative post, which included the mailbox, which was cheaper than the post that you chose.
All right. So let me take a look at that then. Yeah.
Take a look at those again,
I think the short answer, Frank, is we didn't really make a decision on not doing it. We just want to have everything standardized, and if it can be decorative within our budget, great. And Kurt, I will send that to you again.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Frank, one of the things we looked at is I started looking up decorative steel posts, and
they're out of sight. They're
out of sight. And so then I thought, oh boy, the other concern was we are putting these in a sleeve in the sidewalk. So we talked about the fact that we don't want these sleeves to be really large in the sidewalk. We want it, if we could keep the sleeve to say a 4-inch PVC sleeve. So then
you have to look at, I understand, because you have to look at what I sent. I think that matches.
I definitely will.
Take a look at it.
Okay, so I definitely will.
There. Yeah, there's an option.
And I do want to throw out, our recommendation is going to be, and I can't remember, Mary Jo, if I think everybody said it makes sense, to replace the street sign, or was it the stop sign? Yes, I'm sorry, the stop sign.
Yeah.
At Bocce with the same decorative post that we used on the other project.
Yes. Yeah.
Tie it together.
Yeah, tie it together.
So I will look at that mailbox post, so we could talk about that at the next meeting, certainly.
It's on its way to you, Kurt.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the thing that really made me go wide-eyed is every decorative mailbox post made of steel that I found was like $300+.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
wow.
I looked at them. They were outrageous.
And once the person who selected the Chinese menu item, hopefully there'll be a space for a signature, so there'll be no debate about, oh, I didn't think it was going to look like that. And so that the homeowner signs off.
Yeah, that's a great point. What we can do is we have to put together a temporary rights agreement for each person. We can build that into the temporary rights agreement. Okay. The one item that is kind of interesting, if somebody says, I don't want you on my property, then I guess the committee needs to decide, all right, in that case, do they get a slope or a planter? And in that case, do they get stairs? Or by virtue of the fact they said, I don't want you on my property, are they just getting grass and that's it? Right? Because if they don't want us on their property, then everything is on the town right of way. Theoretically, at that point, they have no say in whether it's a timber planter, concrete block planter, what kind of steps they get. So
that's fault.
So we don't have to decide that right now, but that about that. What if somebody says, I don't want you on my property? Okay, then what do we do between the back of sidewalk and the property line?
Mary Jo, like I said, I'm very sorry I have to leave, but the question I'm going to ask you is regarding that letter we received that you emailed out yesterday.
Yep.
Do we need to even respond? I think it was more of a global type of thing. They were upset because the state is, hasn't got any money and we're investing in this. And do we even need to respond to it?
I had asked at the beginning of our meeting, we talk about it. I don't think it's asking for our response. I think that they wanted to make it clear that they're not in favor of the project, but we're going to need to address them at some point because they are the property at, was it 31, and they have the fence. So we are going to be sensitive to their concerns. I think, if I'm right, Kurt, and that's why it'd be really helpful when we get the menus. If I'm right, they're the ones that have the pretty new one fence that is about 6 inches onto town right away. We're talking about replacing it or moving it back. They don't want to do that. At least that's what they said verbally on the second phone call I received from them. So we're going to have to talk to them. And they are elderly. They do not, so it's definitely going to have to be face-to-face.
Okay.
If somebody has stuff in our property, why don't we just inform them that they must remove it? Why do we remove it? Then if we break it, they're going to say, you broke my fence. I think it would be better to say, we're putting the sidewalk in, your improvements are on our property, we respectfully ask you to remove it.
Well, you know what? That is a discussion we're going to have. In this particular situation, we were going out to this family to ask for BSC, their approval to let BSC on their property to take some measurements and take some photos. In the discussion, the wife indicated they're too old to do that sort of work. And because we have did some similar work lower Hartford Avenue, I suggested that we would consider moving it for them. She seemed open to that. The next day, I got a phone call from the husband saying, nope, they don't really approve the project. They're not interested. And rather than go into specifics, I just said, well, at this point, all we're asking is you're okay to let people come and take pictures and do some measurements. And then I got this letter yesterday. So that's where we're at on that. If Bonnie had mentioned that, and that you may have been on that call a couple meetings ago, that's her opinion too. If it's on our property, we take it, we put it down. I'm of the opinion, if we can work with these people, they've been there a really, really long time. They're good people, that it will help us to do some of that type of work if we can, but that's my opinion.
I tend to agree if we can move it without going into crazy costs. I think it's a great, it's an opportunity for us to make friends and to keep people happy and to get this project moving along nicely without a lot of animosity. And if we make the offer, we say, we'll be happy to move your fence 6 inches, 8 inches, whatever it happens to be, as long as it's not going to be an outrageous cost. And then if they say, no, absolutely not, you can't move the fence, hey, at that point in time, sorry, it's on town property. We're going to remove it completely and take it away. So, it's simple as that. We give them the option. We try to play nice, and hopefully they're going to play nice with us. And if they refuse to play nice, then, we have to take a heavy-handed approach. But I think you're right. We probably do have to respond to that letter at some point in time, but maybe we should think about that a little bit for the week.
Yeah, I think, Kurt, if you're going to be down there, it might make sense for one of us to be there with you. I just think they've not met us. I mean, Frank, you probably have met them. They don't know who we are, and we represent the man, and we don't represent,
Neighbors.
nice town. Yeah.
And keep in mind, my visit today is going to be pretty low key. I'm not going to be going on anybody's property. Most of the stuff I need to do probably from my car. So being a cloudy day, hopefully there's not too much beach traffic down there, but I'll get out of my car and kind of just take a walk down the street and I'll be able to see the things I need to see. They won't even know who I am because I'll be in my personal vehicle and.
Yeah, I think just like with our property owners in 29, once they meet you, Kurt and BSC, you guys are just so cordial and knowledgeable. I think that goes a long way in developing trust.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that when we do meet them, like Frank said, maybe if it's a Saturday and we're set up at the community center, we will make sure that we are extremely accommodating and really try to put these people at ease. And I keep thinking, almost try to convey that this is actually an enhancement to their property.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mary Jo, are we gonna meet next Tuesday? You think, Kurt?
Sorry about that.
That's fine with us.
Can't meet next Tuesday. Sorry about that. At least not at this time. I could meet after 12 o'clock. That works with you guys.
I have a 1 o'clock. I have a 1 o'clock on Tuesday.
How about Monday?
That's good for me.
Is Monday at 10 okay for BSC?
Monday at 10 is difficult.
How about Monday at 1?
That would work. Jesse, are you available Monday at 1?
On the 8th?
Correct.
Be the 8th, yeah.
Yeah, looks like I am.
All right, so Monday at 1 works for us.
All right. Tim, are you okay with that?
That works, yes.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully our committee member, others can join us. But I think that's a good setup because if there's anything we have to get done that week, that gives us some time to pull it together. Because I'll just be honest with you, I'm getting a little anxious about getting all this face to face, including the building official and getting a some kind of information session put together.
I can go up and talk to Mark Whalen and say, what's your opinion on this? He's building official. I don't know if that's his jurisdiction or not, but let me ask upstairs a little bit.
Well, I did, go ahead, Tim, but I already talked to him last meeting. We were talking about getting this information, sending it to him to review. And then if he had any questions, we could set up a face-to-face with him or a WebEx, whatever, to discuss his concerns. So he was very gracious. He got right back to me saying, sure. So,
and Mary Jo, based on our discussion today, I'm going to send you a packet tomorrow that you can send to him. And, if he's around, we'd be happy to meet with him by Zoom or whatever, even this week, just to get his read on it.
okay.
And frankly, I think the things that we would be at are simple enough.
Sorry about that. Talk to you later.
The things are simple enough that he'll very quickly, I think, be able to tell us either, yes, I do need to be involved, or no, I'm fine.
Okay.
So I'll have a packet to you tomorrow, and if he's around, I'm happy to meet with him anytime tomorrow, Thursday, or Friday. And it's literally probably a 15-minute discussion at the most.
Okay, well, when you send me the information, I will include those days, and then I'll include your number on the email. Of course, I'll copy it, and you guys can figure it out.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you. So if there's not anything, or is there any public on the meeting? If there's anyone there for public comment, could you speak up? Hearing none. I guess we're adjourned. We don't have a quorum, so I'll just say thank you all. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We'll talk to you next Monday, and anything comes up, give us a buzz.
That sounds great. Have a great remainder of the week.
Bye-bye.
Bring your swimsuit.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Jesse, thanks.